Good afternoon. My name is Cristina Buccola. Occasionally, people call me Cristina Buccola. That's okay, too. I wanted to thank you for providing me with the opportunity to be here with you today and present my testimony. By means of introduction, I am a New York-based attorney who's also licensed to practice in Oregon, New Jersey, and Illinois. I'm the former general counsel of High Times, and I've been a partner in a very large commercial cultivation operation in Oregon. In my current practice, 80% of my work is cannabis related, and I represent clients and undertake public interest and policy work. I came here to speak today about Oregon's regulated adult use program, and I will, but it's become necessary to discuss the actions of Jeff Sessions last week in his rescission of the Cole and Ogden memos, and what this means for state legal cannabis programs going forward. Now, many people today have already touched upon the Ogden and Cole memos and Attorney Sessions' actions, but I'd like to expand on these a little bit more. Collectively, these memos provided guidance to federal prosecutors in states with medical and/or adult use programs as to which cannabis matters to investigate and prosecute based on core federal enforcement priorities. Although certain states made cannabis use, production, and sale legal under specific regulatory programs, these programs remain seemingly at odds with the Controlled Substances Act, which strictly forbids cannabis's cultivation, manufacture, distribution, etc. Importantly, the Cole memo refined federal enforcement priorities initially set forth in the Ogden memo to prevent cannabis distribution to minors, to prevent cannabis revenues from funding cartels and crime syndicates and gangs, to prevent diversion from states with legal cannabis programs into states without such programs, to prevent legal cannabis industries acting as fronts for legal activity, to prevent guns and violence from entering the cannabis activity, to prevent drug driving and curb other public health concerns related to cannabis consumption, and to prevent cannabis consumption and cultivation and possession on public land. When Attorney General Sessions rescinded these memos last week, he took away these guidelines and instructed federal prosecutors back to the principles of the U.S. Attorney's Manual. Now, these principles actually offer U.S. attorneys flexibility in deciding to modify or depart from the principles as are necessary in the interests of fair and effective law enforcement within this district, meaning that where the application of federal criminal law would conflict with the fair administration of justice in the state where the U.S. attorney sits, that U.S. attorney could adopt different measures. This reversion in policy away from the Cole memo warrants an investigation of the individual U.S. attorneys to understand whether each will, in his exercise of prosecutorial discretion, weigh and incorporate the will of the state that has implemented legal cannabis programs. With respect to New York, dialogue must be commenced immediately with the new interim U.S. attorneys appointed by Sessions. And this includes Jeffrey Berman, who's been appointed to the Southern District of New York, Richard Donahue, who's been appointed to the Eastern District of New York, Grant Jackwith, appointed to the Northern District, and James P. Kennedy, appointed to the Western District. We must take their temperature on prosecutorial matters related to cannabis, and if necessary, educate them on the points raised in today's hearing regarding the benefits of a regulated market over prohibition, the nasty byproducts of cannabis prohibition, including the disproportionate and deleterious impact that prohibition has had against communities of color, and to remind them that prohibition of cannabis will always lead to a black market. Even if the federal prosecutors in New York State seem unsupportive of state legal cannabis measures, I urge the New York State Legislature to continue down the path of an adult use program substantially similar to the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which I'll refer to here on out as MRTA. It's very likely that Attorney General Sessions' anti-legal cannabis measures will be overturned in some form or format, and likely very soon, but certainly before the time at which adult use cannabis is open for business in New York State. The backlash to Senators' action in rescinding the Cole memo guidance has been instant, tremendous, and bipartisan. Immediately following the announcement, U.S. senators and representatives from all parties took to social media to express their anger over the rescission, reminding Jeff Sessions about the anti-social justice effects of this measure, the doomed revival of the failed war on drugs, and the interference with states' rights posed by his actions. We have Senator Cory Gardner, a Republican from Colorado, who instantly vowed to take all steps necessary, including holding all the DOJ nominees until Sessions changed his stance. Fiery responses at the federal level have not quelled since last week. Several federal bills repealing cannabis prohibition or alternatively protecting state cannabis laws have gained many, many new sponsors at the federal level. Senators and representatives are writing Sessions demanding him to do an about-face, and the list goes on. Sentiments of this ilk were echoed at the state level as well, with numerous governors, attorneys general, and members of state government expressing their desire to move forward with state legal cannabis programs and the promise to push back against this revision in federal policy. Notably, other states continued with their cannabis business undeterred by Sessions' actions. The very same day that he rescinded the Ogden and Cole memos, Vermont's House of Representatives voted to legalize cannabis possession. The bill passed in Vermont's Senate yesterday, and the governor has promised to sign it into law. A mere 2 days ago, New Hampshire's House of Representatives preliminarily approved an adult use bill for cannabis. Other states are not backing down from proceeding forward with their respective legalization measures, and neither should New York. U.S. Attorney Bob Troyer of the District of Colorado issued a statement regarding this rescission, stating that the United States Attorney's Office in his district will focus in particular on identifying and prosecuting those who generate the greatest or who create the greatest safety threat to our communities, intimating that he and his office will continue to uphold the guidance parameters of the Cole memo when exercising prosecutorial discretion around cannabis matters. And I think he's right. I think the Cole memo still provides extremely good parameters for a regulatory framework. The priorities set forth therein should continue to be the priorities of adult use legalization programs. So using those priorities, I'd like to discuss measures that were implemented in Oregon, where I've also worked, and to show that the sky does not fall when adult use programs are implemented, but also initial measures aren't perfect, and regulation takes time. So one of the priorities I'd like to highlight today is preventing cannabis distribution to minors. People love to talk about, what about the kids? Well, let's talk about the kids. Preventing individuals under the age of 21 years of age from accessing cannabis remains good policy. And to achieve this end, Oregon implemented regulations prohibiting the sale, delivery, or transfer to any cannabis item to those who are under 21 years of age, and established requirements to check identification prior to selling or providing an individual with a cannabis item. Noncompliance with these regulations results in sanctions ranging from a 7-day license suspension and a fee of $1,155 to a 10 to 30-day license suspension or a fine of $1,650 for first-time offense to the cancellation of the license itself. And to assist retailers, the entity tasked with overseeing Oregon's adult use program, the OLCC, which stands for the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, offers free training courses regarding how to properly check IDs, recognize how to recognize fake identification. Now, these punitive and educational measures are a mixed bag. Last month, very impressively, the OLCC conducted a decoy sting to test the enforcement of these identification regulations, and 100% of the dispensaries passed. But unfortunately, yesterday, the OLCC released results that cited something slightly different, and there were varying compliance rates ranging from 87% to 43%. Now, these numbers are less than stellar, but I think they show that regulation is in the process of working. The bad actors are being identified and punished, and the OLCC has called it a wake-up call with further enforcement from them to follow. Now, Oregon's efforts to keep cannabis away from children are not limited to prohibiting sales to minors and checking identification. A number of time, place, and manner regulations have been established to prevent cannabis from seeming attractive to minors or otherwise shielding them from cannabis advertising, marketing, branding, including the prohibition of images of cartoon characters and toys in connection with cannabis advertisements. There's a restriction on television, radio, billboard, and print media advertising to audiences that consist of no more than 30% of minors. There's the inclusion of age checks on cannabis websites and the limitation of location-based cannabis advertising and marketing. Now, there is actually evidence that cannabis use has decreased with 8th graders since the first recreational cannabis sales commenced in Oregon in October 2015. In the 2013 Oregon Health Teen Survey, 9.7% of the 8th graders polled reported cannabis use in the prior 30 days. This number decreased to 8.8% in 2015 and went down further to 6.7% in 2017. The Oregon Health Teen Survey in each of 2013, 2015, and 2017 show rates of cannabis use that remain somewhat unchanged for 11th graders since recreational sales began, with rates of use in the prior 30 days of 20.9%, 19.1%, and 20.9% for each respective year. This downturn in 8th grade use and no change at the 11th grade use may be on account of the 5% quarterly disbursement of cannabis tax revenue for alcohol and drug abuse prevention, early intervention, and treatment services. The provisions of MRTA designed to protect children from cannabis marketing branding exceed, I want to say that again, they exceed the measures implemented in Oregon for the same purpose. Under MRTA, in addition to prohibiting advertisement depicting cannabis consumption by minors or that would otherwise be attractive to minors, we're not allowed to place advertisements within 200 feet of places where children are likely to congregate, such as child care centers, schools, playgrounds, public parks, and libraries. Any advertisement by broadcast cable, radio, print, or digital may only be placed where the audience is reasonably expected to be 20 years of age or older, as opposed to the 70% adult-heavy audience required by Oregon. And additionally, under the revenue allocation provisions of MRTA, 25% of a portion of the taxes raised from adult use cannabis sales will be dedicated to the development and implementation of youth-focused programs that focus on health education and prevention campaigns to reduce the risk of cannabis abuse by school-aged children. Through MRTA, New York State will be aligned with some of the best practices to limit children's exposure to cannabis products and establish early prevention and education programs to prevent early consumption by minors. The next priority I'd like to discuss is out-of-state diversion. This comes up a lot. And admittedly, Oregon continues to face challenges with respect to out-of-state diversion of cannabis and for distribution throughout the country. But it's important to note that diversion is largely attributed to Oregon's medical marijuana program and cannabis grown under that program rather than cultivated under its adult use program. Historically, it's been easier to divert cannabis from the medical program as the tracking, tracing, and reporting requirements have been far less stringent than those required under the adult use program. The Oregon Health Authority, which is the entity that's been tasked with overseeing Oregon's medical program, relied on those in the medical program to self-report information rather than utilize a seed-to-sale tracking program. Seed-to-sale systems trace cannabis throughout its life cycle from growth to processing to dispensing to retailing. Fortunately, last year, Oregon passed legislation that requires medical grow sites, processors, and dispensaries to use the same seed-to-sale tracking program as the adult use program by July 1st of this year. Now, the effectiveness of the seed-to-sale software in keeping Oregon's grown medical cannabis actually in Oregon is yet to be seen, and there are critics who have argued that the seed-to-sale system does not completely eliminate diversion, as it can be manipulated to show product has been marked out of the stream of commerce when it's actually being sold out of a back door. But again, this is the process of regulation. It takes time to refine and protect measures of compliancy, but compliancy never will occur under continued prohibition. Now, unlike Oregon, New York's medical program has been a little bit ahead of the curve. It's required seed-to-sale tracking since the program's commencement in 2016. MRTA will also require New York's adult use program to employ a seed-to-sale system, and it sets itself apart with the added requirement that the Bureau of Marijuana Policy, which will be overseeing the adult program, that it maintains a database that's designed to flag irregular behavior in the seed-to-sale system for them to investigate further. This is not present in Oregon's legislation, and I really do believe that this added layer of inquiry is likely to unearth any kind of routine skimming that happens in the legal cannabis market. And the final priority I'd like to address isn't actually raised in Oregon, and it's not a priority that's stated under either the Cole or Ogden memos, but as we've heard continuously through testimony today, I think I would argue that this is probably one of the most important priorities of any adult use legislation, and that's equity aims. MRTA is quite simply the gold standard here. It has some of the most comprehensive measures designed to encourage minorities and women to participate in the industry. It requires applicants for cannabis licenses to develop diversity plans for the inclusion of racial, ethnic, and gender diversities, while also not barring those with criminal histories from employment. Tax monies levied on cannabis will be channeled to reentry support services for individuals who have served sentences for drug-related offenses. Other tax monies will go towards community reinvestment programs for job placement, health and mental health services, and legal services in connection in the communities most disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. Drug offenses for actions no longer held as drug offenses under adult use programs will be expunged. These equity elements of MRTA are as essential to adult use legislation as any seed-to-sale or advertising requirement. We must ensure that these measures are incorporated into whatever adult use legislation is ultimately passed in New York State, as not to offend our very notions of fairness and justice. Thank you.